This is Shrouded Isles. It's my friend Avid's adventure map. I've been helping him build it for the last 2 years, and now I'm almost ready to start building my own map. But I feel like I need some terraforming practice first, so Avid suggested that I do that here on his server. So I decided to try to build him a mountain using only Axiom. Axiom is what I'll be using to build an entire world from scratch, so I need as much practice as I can get. The first thing I did was to clear an area using the freehand draw brush set to air, masking for wood and leaves. Then I set the same brush to stone spheres and started to draw out the rough shape of a mountain, inspired by some reference images of mountains in New Zealand. I started with a very crude shape, and at this point I was really just trying to see what I could make using only Axiom on a server. I tried to find a compromise between the scale of real mountains and what's possible in Minecraft, while also leaving the top relatively flat for people to build on if they wanted to. Once I was happy with the basic shape, I went back with a smaller brush to increase the level of detail. I knew I would probably have to smooth it out and go back in with the freehand draw brush at least once more, but I wasn't worried about making mistakes because with Axiom you can undo everything you've done with Ctrl-Z. So I started smoothing the mountain with the smooth tool set to default settings, because I wasn't very familiar with it at that time, and I just really wanted to learn what the possibilities were at this point. It's best to leave these tools on the default settings at first, I think, until you're more familiar with using them, and then tweak each setting one by one until you're comfortable with it. You can also save presets in some of the tools, which is incredibly helpful. So it was starting to look a little like what I was aiming for, but I knew it would take a few more passes with each of the tools. So again I went in with a smaller brush to add more details, based on the striations in the pictures of real life mountains I was looking at on my other screen. I went all the way around the mountain with the striations, although I'm not completely sure that makes sense, because I still have a lot of research to do, and at this point I hadn't done much at all. I was just playing, but it is a fantasy Minecraft world after all, and I was quite happy with the direction the build was going in. This time when I smoothed the mountain I lost a lot of detail, so I had to undo some of that, and then went in with the melt tool and carved some gullies to get some of the detail back. Using a combination of the freehand draw brush, the melt tool and the smoothing tool, I came to a sort of balance or compromise. Then I started experimenting with the noise painter to add some texture and shading. The noise painter is great for filling in large areas, but I quickly learned that I couldn't rely on it completely and would need to go in with the regular paintbrush to make the build more realistic. I used several different noise patterns overlaid on top of each other, and then I drew over the top of them with the regular paintbrush until the grey patterns looked as realistic as I could make them. Then I started to use noise patterns again to start adding some greens and browns into the mix, and again went over them afterwards with the regular paintbrush. I used the same technique for the snow, but this time I overlaid several Voronoi edges patterns on top of each other by randomizing the seed before filling in the gaps by hand. I then used a simplex pattern made of different shades of green to try to blend the mountain in with the surrounding terrain colours, adding in more grey and using a smaller brush as I got further up the slopes. Using the stamp tool, I was able to paste in some simple spruce trees I had designed a long time ago, because you can add your saved blueprints to a brush in that tool and paint them into your world. If you want me to show you how to make infinite spruce trees of your own, then let me know in the comments and maybe I'll make a tutorial for it. I finished off by adding paths, bushes and flowers, and used the biome painter to tweak the colour of some of the leaves and grass. At this point I was quite happy with how it was looking, and I couldn't think of anything else to add. So I decided to take a step back, put shaders on and stare at it for a while. And my conclusion was that yes, I am happy with it. I think it worked out pretty well, and it's not bad for a first try. But I knew I still needed a lot more practice. The next day, my friend Blockrat got in touch and asked if I would like to try using the new pale garden blocks for a sort of spooky haunted house themed build called the Creaking Dimension. I thought it would be a good way to get some more terraforming practice and make some brushes using the new blocks, so I agreed to give it a try. He wanted a floating island in a void, so I headed off to a void world to see what I could come up with. So I started off with the stone spheres again because that's what I was familiar with, and I slowly pieced together the shape of an island, with the intention of bringing in a Victorian style house I made a tutorial for last year, once the terrain was complete. I love working in void worlds where everything is entirely up to me. They're a completely blank slate, and I'll be doing something very similar to this when I make my map, though I haven't decided yet if it will be a void or an endless ocean. If you have an opinion about that, or a better idea, let me know in the comments. I was getting quite comfortable with these tools at this point, and because of the ability to use Ctrl-Z to undo anything I'd done, I was enjoying the freedom to just play around and see what shapes I could make. I created more rough shapes, smoothed them, added more and smoothed them again, until it started to look like what I was aiming for. I kept doing this until I was happy with the shape of the island, and I couldn't wait to start experimenting with the new pale garden blocks, which as you can see I had a lot of fun with. He wanted these resin cracks running through the ground, so I used them as an opportunity to add in some colour and light by mixing in some shroom lights and gold in with the resin. I also snuck some pink and blue into some of these ponds just to bring a little more life to it. I needed to make some custom trees for this build, so I used the path tool to create the trunks and branches. Then I added ellipses of leaves and eroded them with a white noise pattern using only air to achieve this effect. I then brought in my Victorian house as a placeholder to be redesigned later, and pasted in my trees. I realised I would need a lot more trees of different sizes, so I had to design some more using the same technique. I used the noise painter to make a simple path up to the house, and I recoloured the house and distressed it a bit to make it look haunted and dilapidated. I think that turned out quite well. Blockrat told me he wanted it to be much more claustrophobic, so I added a lot more trees. That made it look terrible from the outside, but the player will never see the build from the outside, so that doesn't matter, and I instead focused on the atmosphere that you would experience walking around inside the build. I think it turned out sufficiently dark and creepy. I hope he's able to use it for something. It was great building practice, and I ended up building this house on the survival server I play on, so it worked out for me, and I had a lot of fun. So, while I was doing that, we got some incredible news. Avid has earned himself a life-changing opportunity, which he absolutely has to take, and I'm so proud of him. and you'll know all about that if you watch his videos too. But it means he won't be working on Shrouded Isles for a little while either, so it really is a good time for me to wrap up my involvement in his adventure map and start building my own. But I want to leave him with a parting gift, and also attempt to build the biggest thing I've ever done in Minecraft, an entire mountain range. So here we are, back at the original mountain I made, and Avid has marked out the boundary of his adventure map with these temporary wool mountains. He told me I can replace as many of them as I like, so I decided to claim this whole area for my final project on his server. Using the freehand draw brush and masking for wool, I painted air over these mountains to erase them without damaging the terrain underneath. I started with pyramids this time, although I'm still using the freehand draw brush, but I did have to type in the scale because the slider didn't go up that far. I tried adding some cones for mountain peaks and then filled in the gaps with stone spheres again, and I can tell you that the pyramids and cones worked out perfectly. I highly recommend this method of drawing out the shape of mountains if you decide to make some yourself. After using the very small spheres to fill in all the gaps, I used the smooth brush again, but with a very strong setting because I knew I would be going over it again multiple times with the other tools. So on my second pass, I just tried to enhance the shapes that were already there and allow them to sort of grow organically. And then I smoothed them again, but much more gently this time. And then with an even smaller brush, I added a finer level of detail. I was trying to mimic the striations in the pictures of real mountains I was using for reference. And this time I set the smoothing tool to a very gentle setting so I could keep most of the striations while also smoothing out the larger, more unnatural shapes. And then I used the melt tool to carve some gullies in the hope that it would look like erosion. I tried the elevation tool to stretch the mountains upwards so they would look less flat and rounded. I wanted them to be a bit sharper and more spiky. I then used the noise painter to fill in some background textures, but I focused on using the regular paintbrush to bring the details in this time, to give it a more personal touch now that I was more comfortable and familiar with these tools. I think I found the right balance between these tools this time, and it was more fun doing most of the detail work by hand. I started to bring in some browns and greens, again firstly with the noise painter and then by going over it with the regular paintbrush. I used the biome painter to lighten some areas and darken others, and painted some darker colours where there would be running water later. The biome painter has a great effect on grass, leaves and water, and I like painting with it to give my builds an extra level of detail. I used the same technique I used earlier for the snow by overlaying Voronoi edge noise patterns on top of themselves by randomizing the seed, and finally filling in the gaps by hand to make it look more natural. I brought in some water by using the freehand draw brush, but I made a few mistakes. I ended up using a very small brush and not masking the surface, but I had to turn block updates off before it would work. I got there in the end. I wanted it to look like the snow was melting. I then used the stamp tool to bring in my infinite spruce trees from earlier. Axiom makes it very easy to do things like this. In fact, it saves me so much time. I couldn't have done any of this without it. It might have taken weeks instead of hours. So thanks again, Mulberry. These tools are really life-changing for me. When I was changing the biome colours, I realised this would be the perfect place for the witch's house for my Halloween tutorial, so I brought that in and made a little swamp area for it. Finally, I added some paths, bushes, flowers and stones made out of buttons and pressure plates. Anything I could think of to add some subtle detail without going overboard. And I eventually realised that it's done. I couldn't think of anything else to add, so I took a step back and had a break. So while I was offline, Avid and Marmalade made this little house in the swamp, and it turns out my mountains even made it into the finale of Skyblock Kingdoms. Sad Milkman had come online and built this airship, and also a little picnic area down by the lake. This is what I love about servers, you never know what you're going to find each time you log in. So that's it, we're all done here, and I'm really happy with it. I learned so much in this project, I got the experience that I wanted, and I'm really comfortable terraforming with Axiom now, as well as using it for painting and shading. I want to give a big thank you to Avid for trusting me with his precious creation, and also for taking me along on this journey. It's been a lot of fun helping you with your map, and I wish you all the very best on your incredible new adventure. But it's time for me to begin an adventure of my own, and I can't wait to get started. But I have a lot of preparations to make first, so I might make some tutorials while I'm doing that. If you have anything in particular you'd like to see, let me know down in the comments. I really enjoyed making this video, and I hope you were able to learn something from it. At the very least, I'm glad I was able to answer some of the most popular questions I get in my comments, and was able to show you the entire process from start to finish. Maybe I was even able to inspire you to build something of your own. Those are my favourite comments to get. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye for now.